Hello and welcome to the Actual Magicians. Yes, I am an Actual Magicians bookshelf series, where today I'm going to be continuing my series of the top 100 tarot, oracle and divination decks. And today we're going to be covering decks 71 to 80, and these are all decks designed expressly for magical purposes in some way or another. Now, this is the 8th episode of this series, so deck 71, and we're going to start with a very rare deck, but it's very easily available as well. And it has its own story behind it. It's actually a secret Golden Dawn deck that was hidden for a century and was discovered in a very Dan Brown sort of way. And the story behind this is fascinating, and it is a deck that is very close to our own hearts in the Order of Everlasting Day as well. So we're going to start with that, then we're going to take a look at some Enochian decks and some decks for initiatory work and for scrying, pathworking, contemplation and other forms of magic as well. So starting with deck 71, this is the Tarot of the Secret Dawn. It is available on the Game Crafter. It was discovered by Derek Bain in the archives of the Golden Dawn in the Library of Freemasonry in London. And it was actually the text that was discovered. Derek was reading it out to me and I said, "You do realise that's a tarot deck?" And so he went back, got the rest of the records for it from the archives of the Golden Dawn, and then with the work of Canadian artist Janine Hall, and we're going to look at one of her decks as the 80th deck, I think. Yeah, it'll be the 80th deck in this series. She designed the 22 major arcana that were designed probably in about 1911, maybe thereabouts. It was exactly around the time of the Waite-Smith Tarot. And we do know that this was produced as a deck, possibly just for personal use, by the designer who was a Golden Dawn adept called Neville Meakin. And I'll do a separate video on this entire deck, the story behind it. It's absolutely incredible. And Meakin had shown Waite in 1911 this deck. Now, it wasn't this deck because all we have is a text description of it, and I'll put some of that up on the screen when I read a little bit of the background about Meakin and say we'll go into this deck in a lot more detail in a separate video. So it's the Tarot of the Secret Dawn, Janine Hall artwork, Derek Bain the original discovery, and myself and Tarly Goodwin did the research into Neville Meakin and designed the deck actually from the text itself. So the deck you may not even recognize as a tarot deck. Now, can you guess which tarot card this might be? It's the 22 major arcana only. And this is the World. And we know it's the World because we have the Gateway, and you'll have heard me talk about the Gateway as a symbol in other decks and our Cartier project, amongst other things. And we have the moon up here. For those following the Kabbalah material that I've been putting out, we'll recognize that this represents Yesod. And then we have the symbology that is in the outer world to represent the inner world that we pass through from Malkuth into other realms. And this deck is indeed a map of the initiation system. It's a map of the magical world through Kabbalah. Here we have the High Priestess and the infinity symbol there. And you'll notice Janine designed it in sort of 3 segments, which is basically from the descriptions themselves. Now, we don't know what the deck looked like, but this is a fairly close approximation. Here we have the blasted tower. You can see the powerful image of Christ between the 2 thieves. The lightning flash rending the veil of the temple in this. And the way this is used is as a map of initiation. So, for example, we have the rosy cross here, the flame of the torch and the egg, but then we have the pyramid of fire And when these are laid out on the Tree of Life, you can actually virtually see the egg being gestated in the Pyramid of Fire because the cards overlap each other. Again, we don't know if that was the intent of the original design, but the cards do overlap, and even more surprisingly, they overlap, as I'll perhaps show in the talk over for this, onto the Waite-Smith cards and onto the Thoth cards as well. Entirely synchronous, coincidental perhaps. These were designed through pathworking, through a magical process arising on the spheres and getting this information from the astral and then describing it, and Meakin likely designed a deck and showed it Waite, as I've mentioned. So here we have the Hermit. And we have the 4 elements in each of the links of the chain of the Hermit. It's a pure Golden Dawn deck. This was designed by a leading adept, someone who Waite thought was advanced enough to send on a secret mission across Constantinople, across into Egypt. He worked with people of the Baha'i faith and so forth in order to make connections and discuss the esoteric tradition with people across the world, across Europe in the early 1900s. And so it's a secret, actual, proper, secret, occult tarot deck. You can't get more magical than this deck. And to say it's available, we designed it on the Game Crafter, and it comes with a full booklet that you can we can send to you that explains each of the cards. It gives the original text for it and so forth. So this is deck number 71, the Tarot of the Secret Dawn, and the box is designed to be used as a mini altar as well to place the cards on top. So I'll just read you a little bit out of the background about Meakin, and we'll take a look at some of the cards as well. So the adept who created this deck was known in the order of Stella Matutina, the Morning Star, the Golden Dawn, as Frater Ex Orienti Lux, Light from the East. This adept of the Amun Temple of the Golden Dawn offshoot, the Stella Matutina, was in fact an English gentleman born in Ambleside, Cumbria, just down the road from both where I and Tarley Goodwin live in Cumbria. It's literally a short drive away from where we live in Keswick. He was named Neville Gauntlet Tudor Meakin. About 1876 he was born and died in 1912. He was described by none other than A. Waite as an advanced occultist, and in character as a man of honour and very seriously concerned with his esoteric work. Waite wrote that Meakin had showed him a set of his own tarot images based on the Golden Dawn teachings in 1911, which we believe are those described in the papers that are now in the archives of the Golden Dawn and from which we've designed this deck. Meakin was educated in Edinburgh and came from a family line of churchmen, including vicars, curates and deacons, as a lot of the Golden Dawn members actually did come from an ecclesiastical background. He wrote at least 3 books, one called The Court of Saccharissa, A Midsummer Idyll in 1904, the time of which Crowley was receiving the Book of the Law, and another, The Enemy's Camp, described at the time as a comedy of sunshine, with Hugh Sheringham, to whom he left his estate. He was also the author of The Assassins, a romance of the Crusades, written in 1902, which he dedicated to his mother and contains much about the Order of the East. It's unfortunate that Meakin actually died suddenly in 1912. This was just about 3 years after the Waite-Smith Tarot was published, and he was only aged about 45 from the effects of TB. He'd just returned from a trip to establish relationships between the English occult groups, represented by Waite and Felkin, and German groups, and that included a visit to Rudolf Steiner, and his work, that is Meakin's work, appears extremely accomplished. He'd also travelled to Egypt in 1911 on Baha'i business, and he was met apparently with good favour by followers of that religion. He'd been conferred as an Adeptus Minor by Waite in Robert W. Felkin's temple at Bassett Road in London prior to these duties as an ambassador for the order. And at some point he also held office as the master of the Ordo Tabulae Rotundi, the Order of the Table Round, which was an Arthurian-based Rosicrucian group. He in fact claimed he was in a long line of succession to that group. Whilst we don't have the exact date for Meakin's creation of the deck, we presume it was in the last few years of his membership of the Amun Lodge, and the manuscript is bound up in the archives with a description of a vision in Egypt, which recalls Crowley's work in Egypt some years prior in 1904. So we've dated the deck description between 1909 to 1911, likely closer to the latter part of 1911, just before his death in 1912, and that dates the deck to just following the publication of the Waite-Smith deck, because we know that he had shown a version of this deck to Waite in 1911 after the publication of the Waite-Smith deck. So Meakin left the world having transcribed a series of visions of initiatory potential which drew from the original well of the Golden Dawn teaching and experience, and into it he evoked his knowledge of numerology, colour symbolism, correspondence, Kabbalah, alchemy, astrology, and of course tarot. And whilst we were left with only the descriptions that Derek Bain had uncovered in his own research in the archives and no sign of the cards themselves, we were sure that we could reify them, and that's what we did. So these are the Tarot of the Secret Dawn, as we've called them, designed by Neville Meakin, an adept of the Golden Dawn, well favoured by Waite, and entirely different to the Waite-Smith, to the Thoth, and almost predating those. So this is a proper Golden Dawn deck that was never published, and we've reified it, if you like. And that is deck number 71 in our list of magical decks between deck 71 and 80. Deck 72 is the Tarot of Initiation. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the rarer decks. It's one of the out-of-print decks. This was originally bought from a famous occult shop, New Age shop called the Bodhi Tree for $12. And it's, again, a major arcana-only deck. The decks we're looking at in this sequence are either major arcana or not necessarily based per se on the minor arcana of the tarot. So this is the Tarot of Initiation. It was designed by Steve Marshall with illustrations by Emmett Brennan. And you'll notice these two flashes of colour here. This is because, like a lot of decks, early on in the development of tarot, it was a black and white deck and therefore meant to be coloured in by hand. So you can see here we have a wonderful judgment scene. Mixes mythologies somewhat, but it's based on the Golden Dawn. And you can see how clearly now we have the LVX that is slightly hidden on the Waite-Smith deck, but it's there. And that's from the Golden Dawn teachings themselves. This symbolises light. It's the light of an everlasting day that comes after the process of initiation and judgment and rebirth. And so we can see that that's very clear in this deck. And I don't know the date of this deck offhand. I'll see if I can put it down over here if I find it when I'm editing. And we can see the back of this is a geometric rose cross. And my version of this is not just black and white, but it's actually hand-coloured. And I think the BOTA tarot was originally black and white and meant to be coloured. Notice we have the symbolism of the rainbow bridge, Kesheth, on here. Again, a lot of the symbolism that's actually buried in the Waite-Smith deck, but revealed a little bit more in the Waite-Trinic deck, is actually on display here. The sun with Gemini, the twins in the middle, like the death analogy with the hermit, and Cerberus, the three-headed dog down here. Strength. Some of these are partially coloured, which I quite like. And the fact that some are black and white. We have the alchemical marriage in full. Notice the white eagle and the red lion. And again, this is a bit of a mixture between Golden Dawn, Thoth, Waite-Smith, some of the hidden teachings. We've got the black and white floor, the checkered floor of the Temple of the Golden Dawn, the two pillars, and a lot of the alchemical and Christian and zodiacal with the Taurus attributions and the magical. So it's quite a mix. You'll notice here as well, we've also got the red roses being held here and the white lilies being held here. I wonder if we see those on the Magician, where they are on the... I love the temperance on this as well. Again, it's very clearly a mixture between the Thoth Tarot type images and the Waite-Smith type images, but it's also got the Golden Dawn correspondences a lot more clearly here, with Sagittarius going over the bridge of Kesheth into the crown of Kether. So it's a lot clearer. This was designed by someone who really did know what they were doing in terms of the symbolism. And I love the path of the Fool here, and the fact that it's almost a stage made behind him, as in all the world's a stage, and there's the abyss below him as well. He's come away from the stage. Let's go and see if on the Magician, yeah, we've got the roses and lilies, but here we've got them very clearly as below and above. So this is deck number 72, the Tarot of Initiation by Steve Marshall, with illustrations by Emmett Brennan. Now, the way I use this is for contemplation and for arranging on the Tree of Life, because it gives me a map of the initiation system itself. And it also helps bridge some of the similarities and the overlaps between the Thoth, the Golden Dawn, and the Waite-Smith decks as well. And so sometimes decks can do that, particularly if they're being designed from the lens of Western Esotericism, because a contemporary designer, artist, author is drawing on the knowledge of those things. It's quite interesting to see how they then place their own work and place the elements from those systems into their particular deck, into their set of images, and it provides a new map, a synthetic map of the same locations and same experiences and same initiatory process that is common to those decks as well. The Waite-Smith, the Thoth, the Golden Dawn as being the main streams coming from that era. And so that's the Tarot of Initiation, and it's deck number 72. Deck 73 is the Servants of the Light Tarot, designed by Dolores Ashcroft at Nowicki. I can't recall who did the artwork for this. Joe Gill, descendant of engraver sculptor Eric Gill, and Anthony Clark, who also did the Magical Tarot, which was a deck I did consider for this series, but it may have to go into my top 500 decks. But within the top 100, I definitely would recommend the Servants of Light Tarot. Now, again, this is out of print. This is a deck, one of the few decks that I had back in the day. I then sold, I then regretted selling it, and then it took me a while to find it secondhand again. And so I've kept it, I've hoarded it ever since. And this is a deck that is really part of the Servants of Light teaching. So it is post Golden Dawn, post Crowley, post Waite-Smith, more Dion Fortune derived, Gareth Knight, area of Western Esotericism. So we can see here now that we still have a sort of LVX in the deck, but it's far more simplistically designed, I guess, in terms of symbolism and the amount of symbols that are actually on a card. And it has revisionings of some of the cards. So now instead of the Hierophant, we have the Priest. You'll notice the Hebrew letters also in this deck for meditation work, for study, for pathworking. And here we have the roses again and the lilies, the matter, symbols of matter and spirit, amongst other things, embedded on the priest card, which is more of a, I guess, Egyptian-styled priest with the nemes here. Well, that'd be the headdress, wouldn't it? But the collar here. And you can see I actually quite like the temperance. You can see the rainbow bridge, the Kesheth symbolism here, the crown of Kether again on the symbolism, some of the alchemical fire and water being hinted at in this card. The sun, again, we've gone back to the Gemini, the twins corresponding to it, and we have the traditional, or most common used correspondence as Resh for the sun, the Hebrew letter Resh meaning the head. We have the sphere of pure consciousness here, the star, again with Sadai. As Crowley said, Sadai is not the star. Perhaps Sadai is Nuit, the star, depending on what form of Thelema you follow. Quite like the good stocky androgyne devil card here with Ayin as the symbol. So it's a neat deck. It's very, I guess, simplistic in its design, but it bears good contemplation. Don't know what's happening with his hair. It's a bit like mine at the moment. That's what happens if you get, when you sacrifice yourself to the higher, I guess, your hair goes like that. And Justice, nice good Anubis there for Justice. So again, I don't use this deck as much as some of the others, but I did find it useful to appreciate some of the pathworking instructions. I used to do a lot of the pre-written pathworkings of the Paths and the Sephiroth by Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki, so it was nice to almost revisit my own visions of her visions for the Paths through this deck. Oh, I should point out as well that this deck, unlike some of the others we're looking at, I should have pointed that out before I put it all away, is it does have some extra cards like the Maker of Spheres, and also this has, well, that's not an extra card, it's part of the court cards, which are things like the Keeper, whoops, hang on, do that again, like the Keeper of Spheres and the User of Crescents, which are like the King and the Page, I think, from memory. And then we have the Eight of Crescents. So it does have the minor cards in it with somewhat similar intent in the design and symbolism of the Waite-Smith deck, but not quite. It does bridge a little bit further from the Waite-Smith deck. Let's just take another one. So the Five of Spheres, for example, Five of Pentacles we'd have in the Waite-Smith deck. So there is some difference, and again, that didn't quite hit the mark for me in terms of the minor arcana, but I do love, absolutely adore the major arcana of this, because it reminds me of a lot of the inner path workings on the Tree of Life that were designed by Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki, and part of the Servants of the Light teachings as well. So if you do see this around, I would recommend grabbing it, because I think it's been long out of print. It may, I'll double check before I put this up whether it's still available. Maybe they've reprinted it or something, but as far as I know, it's out of print at the moment. This is deck number 73 for magical use, in this case pathworking on the Tree of Life. This is really good for that. Now for decks 74 and 75 we turn to Enochian, and now we depart very much from the traditional layout of the tarot structure. Enochian is a subject in itself. It is a language, it is a form of magic, it is a form of angelic communication that was derived from the work of John Dee and his seer Edward Kelly, and they alleged to communicate with angels in a particular language, and they did that by laying out tables of a magical structure. And these cards, and we have two different types of Enochian tarot. This one is number 74 and number 75 is Lon Milo Duquette's version, and this one is by Schick and Tabitha Cicero, and it's got 89 cards and a massive, good Llewellyn size book with it. The synthesis of Eastern and Western magic. I'm not quite sure I'd call it a synthesis of Eastern and Western magic, but I guess through the elemental patterns, they've corresponded this to the I Ching, which is maybe the I Ching is a system in itself, and Enochian is a system in itself. I'm not sure about the road use of corresponding both systems together, but that's what is part of this deck. And it's a complicated system. Say, I might do a separate video entirely on Enochian. I used to do a lot of Enochian scrying. I think I did my first Enochian scrying when I was about 17, and I dug out the records recently. I found them in my own archives as well, so perhaps share some of that with you. Read the cards, work with the angels, travel the astral plane. And let's take a look at some of the cards. And again, with far more into a magical and elemental structure here. You can see the color coding, the geometric coding, the elemental symbols here. We've got fire, air, earth for the green, and water. And the air symbol has the line running across it because that's the part of the hexagram that relates to air. And here for card 14 we have innocence and purity. Card 13 we have determination, which is air within fire, within earth, within fire. So some of the cards are elemental subsections, and this is because they're all arranged on a grand square. It's like a castle with watchtowers on it. And then we have all of the further correspondences that were made by the Golden Dawn to Enochian. Now, Enochian work wasn't done a massive amount in the Golden Dawn. There were some arguments or discussions about whether it was salient to the Western Esoteric tradition, whether it was like more consorting with spirits and spiritualism. And in fact, I think in Bota, was it Paul Foster Case, decided that Enochian was part of the reason the Golden Dawn had folded, because they were messing with spirits that they couldn't deal with. And I think to some extent they were confusing it with Goetia, which was more grimoire magic. And so here we have all of those correspondences. We have the earth symbol, we have the hermit correspondence, we have the entity here, which is again multi-part, we have the geomancy symbol, we have Nephthys, the sister of Isis, we have the zodiacal correspondence, we have the Hebrew letter correspondence, and we have a card here which has been interpreted as short-term wealth, and I guess in the book it also corresponds that to the I Ching hexagrams as well. And so each of these has its own spirit, geomantic symbol, Egyptian deity, and so forth. In fact, the Golden Dawn had a version of Enochian chess So if you thought Star Trek chess, three-dimensional chess, was convoluted, you should try playing Enochian chess. There we have the Fool, Aleph, Experience, and the geomantic symbol as well. And the colour correspondences of these are pretty tight. And this is an example. This is actually a famous one of the squares corresponding of the letters XR, Pacoma, Nanta, Biton. I always know that off by heart, strangely enough. And we have names that can be derived by going down. And then we have the overlaps of the elements and the squares in between them as well. So, yeah, this is the Tablet of Spirit. That's why it's one of the more well-known ones. And Tablet of Spirit, which is card 89. So it's a convoluted system. It's really meaty in terms of all of the correspondences and the way they link with each other. And there are whole planes of existence. I think I scried most of the 80 of the celestial realms back in the day. And each of them has its own character built from the elements, built through the correspondences. And because it's such a big, tight system, it's a map. And like a lot of the ways we've been seeing tarot in this series, it's an entire map that you can explore. Now, I guess as these are being used for magical purposes, we have different definitions of magic. The usual one is Crowley's. It's the art and science of causing change in conformity with will. The Dion Fortune, slightly misquoted one, the art and science of causing change in consciousness. And my own version, which is more, it's a mapping and navigation of the relationship of reality with itself, which is the way I tend to see a lot of magic, where both mapping things through inquiry and our own studies and testing the bounds of what is real and what is not, and that is arising out of our relationship inside reality, outside reality, with reality, in terms of its unification. That's where magic then takes a more wider definition to the transcendence of magic through mysticism and the spiritual path itself. So Enochian Scrying Tarot is deck number 74, and that's the Llewellyn publication. Again, I don't know if it's in print, but if it isn't, then definitely grab a version if you're interested. And that's deck number 74. Okay, and for deck 75, we have another Enochian set of cards. The Tarot of Ceremonial Magic, Real Magic in a Box by Lon Milo Duquette, who I've met and got to know several times over the years. And I can remember first seeing this deck. I did have a copy, but I'd barely used it. And he was, I think it was giving a talk at one of our tarot cons in the UK when I first saw it laid out on a table. And wow, it definitely works as a consistent map of the Enochian world. And there is a small booklet that comes with this one. And I think this one is far tighter than the Cicero one. It's far more magical in the sense of working with it, far more practical. It's got a lot more correspondence to the tarot. There aren't more correspondences to the I Ching or something in this. But again, you can see the back of the cards has one of the magical Enochian squares on it, one of the tables of the elements. And then the cards themselves have the subsectors of the squares on them, the elemental correspondences, it's at the tap for correspondences, and then the way the square or watchtower is made up of the elements around it. Here we've got spirit, air, and earth, making this particular part of the tablet of correspondences. And we have got the I Ching actually on this as well. So there we have the Princess of Swords corresponding to that area of the Enochian system. And throughout Lon's deck, there are all of the zodiacal correspondences again. But I like this because it's a lot clearer. It's a lot more straightforward. As I say, it's generally tighter. We have the spirit names here. We have the name of the card. And it's obviously, Lon works with Crowley's system a lot more. And therefore, this is far tighter to the Thoth Tarot. Even though, again, the Thoth Tarot uses some of the Golden Dawn names for the cards as well. And so if you really want to work sort of tarot Enochian, then, and I think Lon still has this deck in stock, I think it's still available. So it's definitely worth it. These are, I think, for the Clipothic forms from Aleister Crowley's notebook on here. Yeah, that's what these are. Obviously a nod to Aleister Crowley on the Magus card here. I think that's Constance. That might be Lon. Perhaps McMurtry. And this is a reference to an OTO initiation and so forth. So again, we've got a whole system here, but again, this is taking the Enochian, and Crowley was well versed with Enochian work as well. And there we have the Aeon with some of the spirit names, and I think Lon tends to use this more for, I guess, summoning and working with the energies of the spirits of the tablets. And that is again perhaps why some groups don't actually work with Enochian and some groups really just focus on Enochian, because it's a system in itself and stable effort. You can almost tell that from the elemental square here, the tablets that we have for this particular part of the watchtower. We've got a bit of all sorts of things going on there leading to unstable effort. So again, this is deck number 75, and Enochian magic is a whole thing in itself, and that's why I would recommend either this or the Cicero version if you actually want to explore it, but it is an entire subject all in itself. And I will do a separate video on Enochian, and I'll do a separate video on Meakin's deck and the Golden Dawn teachings behind that deck, perhaps a little bit later on once we've done our top 100. I won't go on to try and do a top 500, not just yet. Okay, so that is deck number 75, the Tarot of Ceremonial Magic by Lon Milo Duquette. Now for deck 76, we have, I guess, one of my personal favourites of all time. This could have been in my top 10 if there'd have been room for it, which again is why this top 100 is very difficult to arrange in a numerical sequence of being favourites, because they are all equally my favourites. This is the Angelarium deck by Peter Moorbacher. And this comes as a very small set of cards. And this I use for Sephiroth work on the Tree of Life, which I don't often work directly with the Sephiroth, but when I do, I use the Angelarium. And the cards are pictures of the Tree of Life. So here we have Kether, the emanation of the crown. That's sort of in order, roughly. Bina, emanation of knowledge. Hokmah, emanation of wisdom. Different versions. Angel of anger, look at that. These just blew me away. The first time I saw the artwork for this was in the offices of Lo Scarabeo in Italy, and they were on the table, and I remember they were showing me, they were very excited about this deck that they were showing me that was, I think it was animals dressed as Sherlock Holmes or something like that. And I was trying to get their excitement for this animal deck, but then my attention was taken by these massive images on the table of this incredible Kabbalistic vision, and I just fell in love with it. So the Angel of Mercy. I've done quite a bit of work with this deck, the Angel of Snow, because for some reason it just speaks to me. The images of the emanations really speak to me personally in this. I'm sure lots of other people. He did a Kickstarter that took a long time to fulfill, but I believe it was fulfilled in the end. But it was several years. It wasn't just a few months late. It was several years. But it was well worth waiting for. And the thing with this is that if you can get the art books, then this is what I actually work with. I don't work with the cards for this. So I actually work with the art books because they are... want to see what the Angel of Annihilation looks like. That's what it looks like. And again, for some people, this might not hit the spot for them. But for me, just this is perhaps how I see them inside my own head. Somewhat similar. If I had to give them a vision, then it would certainly be of the nature of this. Here's the Angel of Visions themselves. I just love the immensity of it and the depth of the vision and the artwork. Look at Malkuth. It just seems to me a very appropriate understanding of Kabbalah. And perhaps, again, it's just the way I see it, but when you find something that speaks to you, it's really important to follow it through. And so here we have the Angel of Storms, and so forth. And so this Peter Morbecker's work, Uriel, it has a lot of the standard Christian angels, but denoted in this incredible artwork. So it was a while waiting for these, and I've got several different versions of these back on the shelf there, but this is my deck number 76, and again I use this for working more through contemplation and activation of different aspects of our relationship to the universe as they emanate, which is another word for angels. This is the Angelarium work of Peter Morbecker. And that's deck 76, the Angelarium. Now, deck 77 is an all-time classic. It's the one that I think most people who have a history of tarot would expect me to include in the tarot specifically designed for occultism. And this is Godfrey Dowson's Hermetic Tarot, published by US Games Systems. Oops. I've had several things jump out of my hands. This is the problem when you're working with occult stuff. Things aren't jumping around of their own accord. They all have their own little spirits. So there we have the Emperor. This, again, is a black and white deck. I don't know if whether it's intended to colour it in. But good luck to you if you decide to do that. Let's start with the Last Judgment, as we've been comparing that across different decks. And you can see here how different that is, but how full of symbolism. The calling of the horn on the banner, the fire symbolism here, the angel, the three figures at the bottom, the spirit of the primal fire, the Lord of the Root. These are very Golden Dawn titles. It is based far more on the Golden Dawn work. You can see the influence of the Waite-Smith to some extent, but that was also based in part on the Golden Dawn. The Hierophant now. But again, this is loaded with Hermetic symbolism. It's loaded with alchemical symbolism, astrological symbolism, Hebrew names. This is really got the whole lot in it. To some extent, this is the precursor to M.M. Milline's work, like the Arcana Tarot and so forth. You can see the inspiration here, because this is intended as a purely Hermetic symbolic deck for study, for work, for contemplation. And again, this has the minor arcana in a lot of detail. You can see some influence from the Thoth deck in the minor arcana, and perhaps some influence from the Waite-Smith. And again, this is why it's interesting having a lot of different occult, hermetic, esoteric decks, because we can see how that person has used the same sources, with the advantage of seeing how other people have used the same sources and mutated them. For example, Crowley's work with Thelema has mutated into the Thoth Tarot. Waite's work with his own mystical system mutated into the Waite-Smith, and Pamela Coleman-Smith's theatrical work, illustration for children's book, mutated into the Waite-Smith, and so forth. And they were all drawing from the Golden Dawn. And then other people are drawing back from the Golden Dawn, trying to perhaps rectify the images yet again. But then they also have in their heads the Waite-Smith, the Thoth, and all of the other decks that have been produced since. This is a fairly early deck, and it's a sort of classic in terms of esoteric decks. I perhaps might do a separate video on this one as well, the Hermetic Tarot by Godfrey Dowson. That is deck number 77. And this is probably the classic occult deck when people think about occult decks as well. The Emperor on the back there, you can see the symbolism layered and layered upon that. Let's take a look at Temperance as well. We can see the Golden Dawn stroke Thoth stroke Waite-Smith work in that as well. Again, this is not, it's possible to read with a lot of these decks, and some of them are partly designed for divination as well, but you have to perhaps adopt a slightly different mindset in terms of reading symbolism and the interpretation of the symbolism into perhaps questions that might be far more mundane than the high esoteric arts that these decks aspire to illustrate. But it is possible to do readings with it. I used to go to psychic fairs back in the day and see people reading with the Hermetic Tarot. Not often, but I would see people, you know, using it as a symbolic of their understanding of the occult laws of the universe. So that is the Hermetic Tarot, and it's deck number 77. Appropriately enough, I guess, deck 78, which is the number of cards in a tarot deck, is the Shadow Tarot by Linda Florio, and this was done in 2003. And I believe that Linda has now passed, but I'll double check when I edit this. And this is then her legacy, I guess, the Shadow Tarot. These cards, what does it say there? These cards are our shadow energies from that remote time when the feminine held power and all manner of magical being existed upon Earth. And I guess this is a anti-tarot, a proper good shadow tarot. We have a lot of the more Goetia-based spirits, Belial, Asmodeus or Asmodee, Gusion, Karakatith. So we actually have a lot of the demonic spirits, Amon, These are the stars. Linda's work was thelemic and worked with the clip-off as well. And again, the artwork may not speak to everyone, but for a long time this was seen as quite a rare, dark, magical deck. There have been other attempts since to do a Goetia inspired deck. In fact, there have been a lot. There have been a lot of Kickstarters with, I guess, demonic decks. But this is the precursor to all of those. This was one of the first ones done. And so, again, if you're looking to work on a slightly shadowy side of esotericism, again, this is perhaps when you put them in a box and illustrate them, it loses some of the power, but it depends on how you work with them, how you engage with them. So I have no problems pronouncing the names of Asmodee and so forth, but I wouldn't necessarily want to work with them straight out of the box. And this is the thing with shadow work entirely. I don't think shadow work is the sort of thing you would ever want someone to do, encourage someone to do, teach someone to do, unless you were really, really well trained, experienced, and had done a lot of that sort of work yourself. And it's best under supervision as well. So if you're going to work with these sorts of ideas and concepts, don't underestimate them, I think is the general advice I'd give. They can be a lot more powerful than you think. There's no such thing as playing around with shadow work and playing around with evil spirits. You either believe in them, in which case why the hell are you working with them, or you don't believe in them, in which case why the hell are you working with them. So this is that's a go. And again, the artwork may not speak to everyone, but it has a raw sort of primal nature to it that I think speaks to the nature of the spirits themselves. It doesn't come, as far as I recall, certainly my version didn't come with an extended book or explanation of working with it, so I guess you'd have to supplement your own work with Goetia work, grimoire work, perhaps shadow work with this particular deck, and I think it is a bit difficult to get hold of now, but that is deck 78. I wanted to put it in that position to some extent. I was glad that it just tended to fall into that position as being the antithesis of tarot in the 78th position, which is the number of cards in a tarot deck as well. So that's the Shadow Tarot by Linda Florio, 2003, deck number 78 in our list. Now, deck 79 somewhat stretches the bounds of this being included in our list of tarot top 100, but it is a deck, it is a set of symbolic images, and I do use it for esoteric work as well. And these are the Divine Astrology cards by Lynn Birkbeck, a friend of ours who lives locally and a very gifted long-term astrologer. And I'll put a link to his website because you can actually see these cards, these images, and use them in the way I use them on his website. And so this is the sun. And basically they're simple mandalas for meditation, and that's all you do. But there are verses that go with them. Here we have the moon, which if you've used Lynn's incredible Sabian symbols, based on the work of Mark Edmund Jones and Elsie Wheeler, I believe it was, then you'll have seen this symbol. It's an important one for divination. And this is the moon. And then we have all of the planets, Neptune and so forth, all the way down. And then we have the zodiacal symbols, and then an explanation of the planets from an astrological point of view. And this is basically how I experience my astrology work, is through symbols like this. I guess I am a tarot card reader at heart. And these can be seen on Lynn's site, I believe. And these are the verses for meditation on each of the cards. So rather than do a full Golden Dawn type ritual to the planets, which we do on occasion do, then this is a nice simple way of activating them in your life. If you want more Venus in your life, then here's the verse and the meditation and the imagery for Venus in the rest of the cards that you can use. And so I do use this quite a bit. I've not used it as often recently, but I'm coming round to it. Now we're going to publish the zodiacal rituals that we wrote a long time ago, maybe 35 years ago. Then we're doing planetary rituals soon in our magical order, and we're going to be basing a lot of that on Lynn's wonderful astrology work, because that's not really my area of expertise. And I get a little bit lazy in thinking, well, Lynn has probably got a better version of it than I can think of, so let's use some of his work here. So I'll leave you with the moon. O moon, goddess of nature and nurture, I receive from you an attunement to nature and the abundance of the unconscious realms, the ability to empathize and to meet the needs of myself and others. It's very succinct. Lynn's keyword work is unparalleled, I think, in both tarot and other divination interpretive work. Lynn has this way of wording keywords down to the absolute core, but applicability of them as well. So this is the astrological cards, the cosmic cards. I don't know if they have a specific name, but you can see them on Lynn's site. And just try it. Just try sitting in front of one for a little while and meditating on the energy of them, because you'll get a big surprise as to how they communicate and talk with you as well. So that's deck 79 of our sequence, the penultimate ones of magical work. And again, we can ritualize these, and I have got a separate long form video of how to design a ritual. And now you can take any of these cards and any of the decks we've looked at, and then perhaps work out through the other video I've done on how to create a ritual and how to structure it and the wording that you can use, and then design your own ritual around any of these decks as well. Perhaps not the Enochian ones unless you know what you're doing. And finally, in position 80, a little bit of a self-serving promo, I guess, for one of our own decks, and I'm going to do this in the Lenormand, so be warned about that, with the original Lenormand, which I have to include as one of my favourite decks. But this is our very own Tarot of Everlasting Day Union deck. This is not the outer deck, the AI deck. This is the Majors Only Union deck, and you'll notice this image has been with us all the way through our series. Up here as a large canvas, and over there as a version of the deck as well. And this comes in two forms. It comes in a small tin as a small portable reading deck for divinations, and then a slightly larger contemplation or temple deck as we use it for. And this is artwork by Janine Hall, who again did the very different artwork for the Meakin deck, the Tarot of the Secret Dawn. And this is I think we still have some copies of this remaining, but contact me if you might be interested. This has got our Herald of our Magical Order on the front of it, the Magister, which will be the cover of the books as well. Full of, again, you might recognise a lot of the symbolism from what we've been talking about. There's the 4 rivers of Eden, the 2 trees in the Garden of Eden, and so forth, the alchemical symbolism in the middle, the 2 angels and so forth. But this is just incredible artwork. It took 12 years in total to design these 22 cards, and for Janine to paint them on large canvases. This is proper artwork. And more importantly for us, they're designed specifically to be laid out on the Tree of Life. So can you see the way these paths actually follow the tree up? And then these are straight paths, and then diagonal paths at the top, and then these angled paths here and here and here and here. they're actually designed specifically so that when you lay them out on the Tree of Life, you can see the journey of the paths very clearly on them. And say we have two versions. That's the larger version, and I'll just grab out the smaller version from here, so you can see the slight difference in size. They're the same deck. That's the Devil and the Hierophant. Interesting that we have those two to compare. But I'd just like to show you some of these. And this I use an awful lot. This is the deck that we designed specifically for magical use. Just take out the Trees of Life. And it has some, we hope, powerful symbolism of the order in it. Tali had a vision of an angel carrying its own wings, and we looked in contemporary and classical art, and we couldn't find any single design where an angel was carrying its own wings. And this is the last angel. This is called the last angel. It's the hanged man, and they're carrying their wings to the Ark of the Covenant under the reversed rainbow, because it's the hanged man, of course. And the blood from the angel's back is turning into the roses of matter that we see in the other cards, because the last thing to get onto the ark after the flood was the angel prior to the flood. And then this is the Emperor, very primal card. And again, the cards are designed to be matched with each other. And the Empress. And this is just astonishing artwork. I was so delighted that Janine wanted to do this and spent 12 years doing it. We have the Fall, because the light is coming back through the journey all the way back down to the Fall, and the Fall has yet to take on the mask of personality and the truth of reality. And the two trees that we see on the Fall card are here just intimated in the stonework that he's got to climb from the duality of the world. And even the 4 hand gestures here are 4 attitudes to life, through prayer, through contemplation and sacrifice and so forth. And there's the Fall with the 2 trees are now silhouetted on the journey. The Apep, the destroyer, is tugging at the shadow of the Fall, which leaves him nothing other than the light, which then spirals down the DNA coil all the way back to the start of the journey. So this was very, very specifically designed. It took us an awful long time. Well, I say, Crowley's deck took 5 years. The Waite Trinic deck took 5 years. The Waite Smith deck took 5 months, and this deck took 12 years. And the shells here represent the Clipoth. The lovers are leaving the garden through self-reflection, through self-awareness. We have the rose key symbolism that's part of our greater journey. And again, you can see our comparator to the Temperance card here. So this is the Tarot of Everlasting Day, and more specifically, it was designed, it's part of 3 decks. We had the idea to design 3 decks that match each other. A beginner's deck, which is the outer deck, which is the one I eventually designed with AI, and that has both scenic minors and pip card minors, so you can mix and match, which I don't think has ever been done in a deck before. And that was made possible by the use of AI art, but we also use agile artists, and this took 12 years, and that's why we haven't necessarily recreated another deck like it. And this is specifically designed for our own magical order, for our own magical work and so forth. It can be read separately, it can be used for divination, but far more importantly, it's used for our occult work, our magical practice and so forth. And it takes its cue from the Waite Trinic deck that we've looked at before, and perhaps I'll do a separate video on that as well. And this really was our version of what Waite was trying to get at with the spiritual journey, but we didn't want to recreate the Waite Trinic deck because that was his deck. We wanted a more contemporary version that mapped to our own work and our own symbolism and our own wider tarot universe. So again, a little bit self-serving, but I don't think I mentioned any of our decks in our entire top 100, but obviously we have to have at least one deck or two in our top 100 because it's my personal top 100, and these are the decks I actually use and have some experience with. And you'll see that the rose key symbol is actually the thing that opens up the deck. Every time you open the packet, you are opening the rose key, which is the interface between matter and spirit in relationship that unlocks experience and mystical experience as well. So that is deck 80, and so we are at the end of our magical decks, and then we're going to do Lenormand decks next time, and then finally in the top 100 I'll cover any decks that I seem to have missed in this particular segment of decks that perhaps are a little bit newer, but I still love and have started to use over the last 10 years. I count new as the last 10 years. And so I feel like I can recommend them or talk about them a little bit because I've actually used them. And there's many hundreds, if not several thousand decks that I haven't used as much, because this is the weird thing that I don't get sometimes with tarot reviewers, that they can only have ever used that deck once, given the number of decks that they review or attest that they're using. In actual practice, in reality, in the actual magician's life, then you have a limited amount of time that you're going to be using decks, particularly given the time that YouTube videos take to produce. And that then limits the amount of time that you're actually using the decks. So I think, to me at least, it's important I mainly talk in my top 100 about decks I've used for 20, 30 years and would recommend, rather than a deck that I've just seen or I'm just showing for the sake of showing it. So hopefully we'll have our Lenormand sequence next, and then contemporary ones to finish off our top 100. And then we can get on to doing some more videos about more specific things within this whole area. Thanks a lot for watching as ever, and as ever, the worker is hidden in the workshop.